Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am wrapping up my reading for the month of October. After a slow September, I am back to form, having read 7 books this month, which is very pleasing to me given that I only read 3 books in September. I need to stop saying only. It's fine that I read 3 books in September, but I'm pleased that I've read 7 in October. Okay, let's begin. Instead of fussing over these words, let me just tell you about the books that I read. So the first book that I read in the month of October was Strong Female Character by Fern, Brady. I actually started this one in September and just finished it in October, I believe. Yes, accurate. Okay, so this is a memoir, so it's a non-fiction book, obviously, and Fern Brady is a Scottish comedian who I love her comedy. I think she's a great comedian. She's also autistic, and so this, I would say this memoir is more about her kind of discovering her autism and coming to terms with it and understanding herself better than it is about comedy, although obviously because comedy is part of her life, she does talk about her career in comedy as well. I really enjoyed this memoir. I thought it was really good. I actually listened to this one on audiobook and it was read by Fern Brady, which was fantastic. If you're a fan of her comedy, you will, appreciate her the way she speaks and her kind of like intonation. It definitely comes across as well in the telling on the audiobook. So I really enjoyed that. In fact, I feel like it enhanced my experience of reading this book. So I think that she is doing very important work bringing to attention aspects of her presentation of autism that seldom are addressed, particularly around meltdowns, because we don't often hear about what that looks like for adults with autism. To know how that comes out, how that might present, and also some of the aspects of her presentation of autism are very much aligned with more female presentations, or that sort of side of things, less typical in the sense of putting it against the criteria and so on, which is why so many women with autism go so long without being diagnosed, because it's a lot harder to diagnose women against criteria that were created using samples that only included young white boys. And that's definitely something that's addressed in this book as well. So she talks about that. Definitely worth reading, but do not go in expecting comedy and it to be super funny. I did not find it funny. I mean, there's humor in her telling, but it's not at its core a funny book. So if you're expecting that as part of the memoir, erase that expectation. I gave this one 4 stars and I thought it was fantastic. Very much something that I think people should read, because I just think the way that she is advocating for the autism community, especially the more female presenting side of the autism community, I think is absolutely must-read material, especially if you've got people in your life who are neurodivergent. Okay, the second book that I read in the month of October, I read as part of my Reading Around the World book club, where we're reading, attempting to read a book each month from a different country. This is the book from Gabon, and it is called Awu's Story by Justine Mintsa. This was a really interesting read. So essentially, we basically are beginning with a family who, and sort of like getting to understand what village life is like. And it's, again, one of these stories where we're talking about the impacts of colonization and the impacts of modernization, and sort of like the transitional phase as a country quote-unquote modernizes and what is lost and what is gained, and the difficulties of that kind of like interim period where you're trying to, where things aren't quite where they should be in terms of, say, for example, there's an example in here of giving birth in a hospital versus giving birth at the side of a river, which is a more traditional way to go about things, and, sort of what is lost there in that sort of transitional period where the local knowledge and historic knowledge is lost from generation to generation, but the modern facilities aren't quite there in terms of being sanitary and safe. So yeah, like there were lots of examples of that in this story. So essentially we follow this woman, Awu, and she is, at the beginning of the book, she is an educated girl, which is sort of a newish thing, and she marries a man who has a first wife, because that's part of tradition in Gabon, that people might have more than one wife. So he sees his first wife really as his like partner, and although he is good to Awu, she really craves a partner, someone who sees her as a partner. She doesn't feel like she is loved by him in the same way that he loves his first wife. And he only takes on a second wife because his first wife is unable to have children. So, there's sort of sadness in that for him. He's doing what is expected of him, but it's not something that he particularly wanted to do. And although he's good to her, he's not what she expected. And then we sort of go through this period of like, events happen, and things are sort of going along swimmingly. They're, well respected in, her husband is well respected in the community and so on. He is a teacher at a local school, and, he seems like he's a good teacher and somebody who cares about his students and is trying to do the best by them. He retires because he reaches the age of retirement, and that is what you do, and then everything begins to sort of fall apart, and because the systems where you should be able to access a pension because you've been working your whole life, adding to, giving to your community and so on, there's like layers of bureaucracy that make it really difficult for him to do that. And so then things start to sort of really fall apart. In this book, I thought there were some passages of it that felt a little bit like over the top flowery descriptions and a bit overdone, but it was otherwise a pretty compelling book. And I really appreciate that sort of exploration of like post-colonial experience in a country. So that's of particular interest to me. There was some unexpected sort of twists towards the end in the story that kind of like you thought it was going in this direction and then it just really pivoted. And so there was also, as part of that, I think a very, a critical look at some aspects of traditional society. So this was by no means just slamming on modern society. It was slamming on anything in the society that was not good. So, trying to find that balance and like take what is good from tradition and, maintain that where we can, while also modernizing for some of the benefits of modernity, in terms of like, for example, infant mortality rates might be a good example of that. So lots of things to think about from this novel, and it was definitely a good one for our book club. We talked a lot around this one. It brought up a lot of stuff for us to discuss, which was so this was an excellent choice. So if you're doing a similar challenge, I would highly recommend this when you get to Gabon. Okay, the next book that I read, oh sorry, I don't think I told you what star rating I gave it. It was 3.5 stars. The next book that I read, again, was a non-fiction book, and it's a book that my husband's auntie has loaned to me, so I'm now going to be able to give it back to her, which is good. And it is called Aunts Up the Cross by Robin Dalton. So this was an account of a woman who grew up in a very sort of bohemian household in the interwar period in King's Cross in Sydney. So everybody in her family is highly eccentric and they do wacky things. Everyone is quite mad in their own way. And I also thought that the writing was quite good here too. So nothing is ever boring in this household. Everything's just like crazy all the time. So there were a few moments in this book that are described. So I will say that it was first published, let me see if I can find that information, in 1965. So as you can imagine, things have shifted since 1965 in terms of the way that we talk about things. So there were some moments in here that she describes that really don't pass muster in 2024. And I mean, that's always the risk that you run when you read a book that was written a while ago, because things in society shift and, the ways that people talk about things might not, the language they use and so on has shifted over that time. So there were a few moments like that in this book. They were few and far between. It wasn't too over the top with them. But it was otherwise a very readable book, very enjoyable. I enjoyed how mad everything was in the household and just sort of like all the unexpected things that kept happening and the people that they interacted with and like the little foibles of each of the aunts was interesting. So I enjoyed this overall and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was another non-fiction book. I really should have saved some of these books for non-fiction November, obviously, but I just didn't. I read what I felt like reading, which is good. That is what I was hoping to do this year. So the book that I read next was The Resilience Myth, New Thinking on Grit, Strength and Growth After Trauma by Soraya Chemaly. I apologize if I've said that incorrectly. I also listened to this one on audiobook and then purchased the paperback copy afterwards because this was a 5-star read for me. So this is a book essentially about an aspect of psychology that is of interest to me. So there's a lot of stuff around resilience now that I really... I think the word resilience gets misused and in terms of the way that it is applied to people. And specifically, I'm thinking about people with disability, for example, where the word being resilient, it's sort of taken to mean that individually you're required to sort of, just get on with it and be able to bounce back on an individual level. And what this book is really about, and sorry, just to be clear, I find that quite offensive specifically when it's applied to people with disability. And, I'm thinking here about, for example, someone with ADHD, who is, who having sort of a bold emotional profile, one might say, is part of many people's presentation of ADHD. So telling them to be more resilient is actually kind of ableist and offensive because often we mean it to mean in an individual sense. And what it really equates to in many cases is, stop bothering me, I don't want to deal with this, you've got to work it out on your own. And what this book is about is kind of flying in the face of that individuality and talking about the fact that resilience really is a community thing. So you can be a resilient community, and actually being resilient as an individual often will mean asking for help, which flies in the face of what we often think of when we think about resilience. Anyway, I think, because she's talking about this this book was published this year, and so she's talking about it in the context of what is going on, in terms of climate crisis, in terms of the political landscape and so on, and talking about how we survive in this world that we find ourselves in now, where we just have lots of stuff going on, and often it's crisis after crisis, especially in terms of the climate crisis. We're talking about big events that are happening and, wreaking havoc on individuals and communities alike. And so I thought this was just like a really brilliant exploration of sort of the failure of our current Western concept of resilience. And it was a real call to kind of lean in to care for community as the basis of true resilience. So actually being part of community and sort of how we look after one another is how we truly are resilient. So I just really liked that sort of shift of perspective, and it gave me a lot to think about and to sort of add, I guess, in many ways, confirmation bias, what I was already thinking about. But this definitely sort of added some rigor to my own thinking about this topic and gave me lots more to kind of I guess give depth to what I already was identifying in my regular life. So yeah, I loved it. 5 stars. Highly, highly recommend. The next book I read is one that I read on my e-reader, so I don't have a physical copy of it, and it is Passing Strange by Ellen Klages. I don't know if that's how you say the surname of the author, but that is, I apologize if I've said that incorrectly. So this is a sort of a mix of historical fiction and fantasy. It's a relatively short book. It was only 222 pages, and it's set in 1940s San Francisco, and then also more in the modern day as well. So we follow some characters. We start out in the modern day and then flash back to the 1940s in San Francisco, where it's sort of depicted as a city where people who are a bit different, might be a bit unconventional, might be a bit outcast from their communities and conventional society, and it's sort of like a haven for those people. Although I will say in the book it was not all sunshine and roses for those people because there was danger lurking for people as well, and it definitely didn't shy away from talking about things like racism and some of the difficulties that the queer community faced, particularly women who wanted to dress in a more masculine way at that time, and some of the rules around that. Now, I don't know how much of that is true. I'm assuming that there's a lot of truth to the sort of historical aspects of this book in terms of, because it did appear that the research was done by the author. So essentially we follow a group of women who are all lesbians or at least bisexual, but they're currently in queer, women with women relationships. And they are basically, we sort of are following their lives, and specifically we mostly are focused on the life of an artist and her lover, who is a singer in a queer bar. We go from there. So what I will also say, I should also say it's kind of inspired by pulp fictions. Pulp novels, you know what I'm talking, fiction novels, a film noir, and also some, sort of wacky elements as well. Now, the thing about this as well is that there are randomly fantasy elements. And I had a feeling when I got to the end of this book, because it's published by, I think, Tor.com. So my feeling is that this book was written as a historical fiction. And because it was either like submitted to Tor.com as a publisher, or, the author wanted to get it published and these guys were willing to publish something, but it needed to include fantasy because that's what they publish. So it kind of felt like the fantasy elements were kind of tacked on or like inserted, and every time something fantasy would happen, because there's sort of like a bit of a magic system that is there, it definitely it was a real, like, it felt very different to the other parts of the book. So the historic parts of the book were really good, and then the fantasy elements of the book were a bit weird. So essentially, like, the magic system is there's like one of the characters can do this magic with a map, and it's sort of supposedly like a little bit sciencey, but we don't really understand how it works, so therefore it's magic, which is basically what magic is. It's like, we don't really understand how this works, so we're going to just call it magic. But basically she was able to like fold a map in a particular way that would mean that you can go from one place to another faster than you should be able to get there, and then you've got to like burn the map and then things go back to normal. It's like a temporary kind of linking of two places to make it faster to get there. So that was kind of like the main magic that happens, and then there was another magical element that I won't tell you about because it will spoil the ending of the book if I do. So those magical elements did not feel particularly well explained to me. They definitely felt like a tack on, but the historical fiction elements are fantastic, and I really loved the LGBTQIA plus perspective of 1940s San Francisco. I thought that was great. The characters were interesting. The storytelling was good. But yeah, it just, like, the magical elements just were weird. And then I will also say, the magic elements happen at the beginning, and then they just don't happen for ages. And then all of a sudden, the map thing happens again, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. Like, forgot about that weird magic map situation, because it just hasn't happened for ages. So yeah, like, it's a bit weird. Anyway, I didn't dislike it. I gave it 3.5 stars. And I think definitely the historical fiction elements were what made it good. All right, moving on. So the next book that I finished in October was Devotion by Hannah Kent. I listened to the audiobook of this one, and it was narrated by Emily Wheaton. This is historical fiction, and it is by an Australian author. This is also a book from my 24 in 24 list, which is a list of books that I was hoping to get to this year. I am not going to do all of them. It's not possible for me to get through all of them before the end of the year, but I'm going to try and get a few more before we get to the end of the year. Anyway, I was glad to get this one off my list because it is quite a thick one. It's 432 pages, so it's quite a chunky novel, and I was struggling with this one at the beginning because it starts, I feel, quite slowly. So there's sort of 3 sections to this novel. The first section is set in 1836 in Prussia, and we follow our main character and our narrator, who is called Hannah, and she is sort of an atypical child in that or an atypical female child in her community, because she's very much at home in nature, and she sort of has, again, some, like, there's a bit of a, like, supernatural element to this book as well, in that there's sort of some magical stuff that goes on in the story that kind of like threads between. But anyway, she sort of has this like almost supernatural connection with nature, in that she can hear like water, like she has a, you know, a sixth sense for running water, and like she can hear the sounds, and it's almost like a music that she can hear with trees and other parts of nature. Anyway, so she sort of runs a little bit wild as much as she sort of is able, but she is not really keen to conform to her strict community. So her family are Lutherans, and the Lutherans at this time are persecuted in Prussia, and they live in a community called in K. The place is called K, a little village, and they're sort of shunned by other the sort of more mainstream religious people, I guess, in that area. And they're hoping to try and get out, but it's been difficult. Anyway, we start there, and she doesn't have any friends. Hannah doesn't have any friends, and then she meets a new girl, comes to the village, another Lutheran family, and her name is Thea, and they sort of form a very strong friendship that then turns into something more, ? And that's sort of the theme of this book. Then eventually there is, they are able to get out of the country, and the place that has been found for them to go is in Australia. So it's sort of all the way over the other side of the world, and at that time, obviously, you had to go by ship, so it took a very long time to get there. So then the second part of this book is them on the ship, heading to their new home in South Australia. And then obviously the third part of the book is them in South Australia, the community, and building in the new country. So it was a really slow start. That beginning part where we're getting to know the characters, I just wasn't connecting super well with the characters at that point. You know what it is? It's the way, and this has been an issue for me in the past as well, because Hannah is a child, so she's like a young teenager. She's just gotten her period at the beginning of the book, so you know that sort of gives you an idea of how old she is. And then, but the way that character is written didn't feel authentic to me. It's, you know, when people write child characters and they just write them like a bit too naive, naive in a way that doesn't feel authentic. So if ever I find a book with an authentically written child character, I'm always very excited, because it doesn't happen very often. So this, I think, was a case where I just wasn't connecting with Hannah, because I was just getting a bit irritated by her, and her, you know, the naivety that she had there, but not in a way that I wouldn't be irritated if it was an actual child authentically being naive. You know what I mean? I don't know. Hopefully you understand what I'm getting at. Anyway, I struggled at the beginning of this book, and so I wasn't keen to kind of pick it up, and I had to push myself through that section. Once they got onto the ship, things started to pick up a little bit, and then there was a twist that happens in the middle of the book, and I was not expecting it at all, and I'm still a little bit reeling from it, because it was like, what the heck is happening here? So I will not tell you what it is, but oh my god. And then the other thing that was a bit that I didn't love so much about it was that there were some really like over the top moments, but I guess that is kind of teenagers for you, and the way that teenagers often feel things like very intensely. Like, I vaguely remember being a teenager myself and feeling things a lot more intensely than I do now, and reacting in I probably did react in over the top ways. Anyway, I won't hold it against these teenagers for being a bit over the top, but it was a bit irritating to read. So that was a bit weird. And then I guess the other thing that was a bit weird, as I said, was again the sort of like supernatural elements of it. And there was a scene right towards the end of the book, and I was just like, what the heck is going on here? Like it was just really out of left field. So yeah, there were bits of this book. I've given it 4 stars, but I'm wondering if I was too generous. You know why I did give it 4 stars in the end though, is because I did cry. And if I cry in a book, I usually I'm enjoying it a lot at that point. So I don't know. I think I forgave it for its foibles a little bit more because when I did the review, I was still like fresh from crying. I don't know. I think what this book gets right is the way that it explores grief and love as well. And I think that is something that I appreciated about the book. All right, so that's that one. 4 stars I gave it. Maybe that was a little bit generous. The last book that I read, and I'm going to tell you about it really quickly because I can see I've only got, I think, 5 minutes left of recording time on my camera, is A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. I read this one because of a book club, and actually tomorrow, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about it with the book club. And this was an essay that was written, and also quite recently I spoke about this because I vlogged reading this book. So I won't go into too much detail because you can watch the vlog, which I'll put up in the cards for you, and link down below in the description as well. But essentially, I loved this. It's an essay about what a person needs to be able to write a fantastic novel, and basically it's privilege, which is a bit of a spoiler. It's privilege. So A Room of One's Own is part of that privilege. So being privileged enough to have your own room, to not be interrupted, to have enough money, to have good food in your belly that, you know, so that you're not feeling hungry and, you know, or malnourished. All of those things, like an independent income, education, all of those things are required. So when you think about the literary canon and how overrepresented white men are in that category of people, and you know, this applies across the board, especially in Western countries, of course, that we're talking mostly about white men here being at the top of their field and being overrepresented in each of those fields. It's not because inherently white men are better than other people at those things. It's that historically speaking, and still to this day, to a lesser extent than before, but still to this day, that's who has the privilege. So, you know, this was written in 1920 something, 1929, and it still felt really relevant today. The discourse has shifted a little bit, but it's certainly still super relevant. So, you know, I thought this was great. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars, and I'm so glad that I have read it. So, that is my haul. Not my haul. That is what I read. Pop that one on the top. That's what I read this month, and I am pleased that I'm back to form with my reading and was able to get through so many books in this month, and hopefully November is going to be just as productive. We shall see. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!